trait for a mastering person to have, I guess, because it's really detail oriented and that kind of thing. So maybe my natural tendencies led me into mastering there too. But I was just basically spending more time on the projects than I felt like I was getting paid for. And I was, of course, happy to have the work, but there was no breaks. The band would be there for 10 hours, and then I would spend 3 hours editing and then get up and do it all over again. And so basically a combination of those things led me into mastering.
Nice. So I guess let's jump into your approach to mastering. What does your workflow look like? What's the first thing you do when you get a song?
Well, the first thing I do when I get a song or project is listen to it. And I've gotten pretty good at deciding like right away if I'm going to use any analog processing or if I'm going to just stay all digital, because that can affect, that does affect my workflow. And I also have, like I mentioned, I have a home setup where I can do a lot of great work. I have good monitoring there and basically a mirror image of my computer. I have two computers that are the same settings. So there's times, especially when things are busy, that, I may just do something all digital and I can do that from my home rig if I need to, because that happens more than you might think. I mean, it's great to have these analog tools, but there's some projects that just don't need it. And before I get too far into the workflow, I've had cases where I've used the analog gear and I think it's a great candidate, like a rock band, like just simple rock band, great mixes, plenty of headroom, that's the perfect candidate for using analog gear. I had a project where I did my usual thing with analog gear and some plugins, of course, and they didn't love it. And I was like, that's strange, because it doesn't happen too often either. But I'm like, okay. And they sent me some notes about it. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to, if they're already so happy with their mix, I'm just going to stay digital and do like a super light touch approach. And I sent them that and it was perfect. So I'm like, okay, I guess there's a lesson right there. But I've never had it the opposite way where I stayed all digital and someone's like, you know what? I can tell you didn't use analog gear and it would be better if you used analog gear. So please, I've never had it go the other way. So that's
so funny. That
tells you something. But there are projects where like I feel like I could only do maybe 80% of quality of a job with just digital. And I'm a fan of plugins. I love digital audio. Amazing plugins out there. I've done plenty of projects 100% digital, but there are some projects where a combination of some of this gear is like the perfect ingredients for getting what the client wants. And it just kind of depends. But I have gotten good at kind of determining what I'm going to use right away.
Well, what do you think it is that makes something a good candidate for just staying in the box? Because it's interesting you said that, because I've had instances where I've sent off my mixes to mastering, and the mastering engineer puts it through his gear and it just completely kills. This happened once where it just completely like took off way too much top end. It made the song muddy all of a sudden. Like it just ruined the vibe that we had going in the mix. And we asked him to redo it, and then it was perfect, and it was almost like he didn't do anything.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing about mastering is roughly half the clients are expecting huge changes, and you're going to like totally kill it, as they say. And then the other half of the clients are like, they're expecting you to like barely do anything. And unless you have a good communication about it, you could totally miss the mark. Right. And I try to get a feel for that before I start as well. Prior to, even before I listen to it, I have a project intake form where people tell me like all the details of the project, what formats they're going to need masters for, like all the titles, so I can just copy and paste, because I'm a big fan of copying and pasting titles, because then there's no room for error.
Screw it up.
Yeah, if there's an error, it's because they did it. And I asked them like a loudness preference, like, do you just want this crazy loud? Do you want me to preserve all the dynamics, or somewhere in the middle? And I get some information about where to take it. But the deciding factors there are a couple things. Sometimes if the mix is already somewhat too heavily limited, going analog is probably just going to destroy it and make it worse, because it just can't handle another round of intense processing that analog can be. It's not, my analog chain can be very transparent, but if you take something that's brick walled and then run it through analog, then you kind of have to brick wall it again to some degree to get it back to like a digital loudness that they're going to be happy with. So it's just too much processing. So even if it's like a rock band, if I get a mix that's brick walled and they're not able to send an unlimited mix, I'll stay all digital.
Wow.
If it's more of an acoustic-based thing or it's really sparse, like this weekend for my home setup, I did it was just a single, but it was like a really piano. It was all piano with some ambient sounds, but I mean, it was essentially a solo piano piece. And it's like, well, that obviously is not going to need any analog processing. And if anything, those low piano notes introduce distortion faster than anything else sometimes. So stayed all digital. I've done a cappella records that clearly need to stay all digital because the noise floor is so again, my analog chain has a very low noise floor, but when you're talking a cappella,
you're going to hear that.
Yeah, and usually classical stuff, but last year I did it was kind of more of a progressive classical artist, if that is even a thing. He actually insisted, this is rare, but he insists that I use analog gear. Like he wanted some color and character on his record, but my normal approach for classical music is totally digital, clean, transparent. Even if you do like a dB or two of limiting, that's considered a lot in classical world. I don't do a lot of classical, but those are some cases. Sometimes really modern pop, slick stuff, I'll stay digital just because the mixes are so like really dialed in how they want it. It's like any change would be bad. I'm just doing really subtle EQ changes, combing through it with RX to remove all the mouth clicks and pops and weird stuff like that. And just setting the final level with a digital limiter. But, going analog could diminish some of the transients and it could be a negative thing. I mean, it just really depends.
Yeah.
So those are some quick examples of staying digital versus analog. There's no hard and fast rules, but over the years I've just gotten, I'll listen to it, even if it's on my laptop speakers. I can be like, okay, this is something I definitely need to do at the main studio, use some analog, or this is something that, whether I do it at the main studio or my home setup, I don't need any analog tools. I can stay all digital and it's going to be fine. So I found that's pretty common. So that's the first thing I do is just decide where I'm going to do it and how I'm going to do it. And then from there.
So, are you usually like listening on just headphones, or it doesn't matter even, you just listen to the song?
For that part of the process, I don't even need headphones usually. I just open it up. Usually I have RX on my laptop. The one annoying thing with Wavelab Pro is you need the USB thing still. And they're going to get rid of that soon, but I can't open Wavelab Pro on my laptop unless I have, unless I have the USB thing. So I usually just open it in RX and for one, kind of see how loud it is, see what kind of music it is, see what it's going to need. So I just kind of listen to it. And then, assuming I'm using the analog gear, I use Reaper, the program Reaper, for the initial part of the process. I use Wavelab for all digital projects, and I use Wavelab to finalize projects. But before Wavelab 10, Wavelab was pretty terrible at integrating analog gear. You could do it, but it was not it was pretty bad at it. And I used to use Pro Tools for that part of the process. But at some point I discovered Reaper. I used to think Reaper was for people that were too cheap to buy Pro Tools, but or subscribe to Pro Tools now, if you will. But
oh, geez, yeah,
Reaper is actually insanely customizable, and I've gone down a major rabbit hole of customizing it. I don't know how to do it myself, but you can write scripts. So I came across a guy, I forget where he's from, probably not far from you, to be honest. I can't remember the country he's from, but somewhere
Eastern Europe or something.
Yeah, I forget where. But he's amazing. He takes all my crazy ideas and turns them into reality for just time-saving stuff for setting up projects. And I've worked myself into such a deep rabbit hole that if I didn't have my Reaper set up for the initial processing, I'd feel like I was working way too slow and inefficiently. So
wow.
The first thing I do is load.
There was a guest on my show that uses Reaper named William Bowser, who you should probably get in touch with because I know he does a lot of that stuff as well.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar. Yeah, I mean, I tried Reaper because, I was using Pro Tools just as a way to send audio to the analog gear and then capture it back to digital, and then I would finish in Wavelab. So I was using Pro Tools in a very non-traditional way, and I kept hearing about Reaper, and I would try it, and I would say, no, this is weird. This isn't working. And then one time it just clicked, and then it just snowballed. Like I spent probably 2 months working slower than I would have in Pro Tools, but then the gains were just exponential. Like, wow, I'm just like working way more efficiently. more accurately. It's more stable. It's just, I wouldn't really trade it for anything at this point. And I think Wavelab will get to that point soon too. It took a big step with Wavelab 10 for better analog integration, and Wavelab 11 will be out eventually, and it might get there. And for those that are listening, like if you wanted to use Wavelab and stay in one piece of software, you certainly can. Like it's way better for that now. There's some people that really want to stay in one piece of software. For me, I'd rather use two pieces of software if it means a better end result and faster and stuff. And like I said, I'm just too far into this rabbit hole of like custom setups. So he's got all these scripts made for me, and I can talk about the workflow, which might touch on some of them. But basically,
sure,
I load the songs into the session, and I put them in the correct order. I'm big on getting the song order before I start a record. You know, some people just get all the songs and they send it back, and then they consider like the sequencing like a whole nother step. And I just can't do that. I need to at least know a rough idea of the song order. I usually get the final song order, but occasionally things change. But I need to know what's the first song, what's the flow of the record. Like I can't get like 10 songs that are not labeled and have no context and master them, because that's only like part of the job. Anyway, so I load them in, and I have a script in Reaper that I put them in the correct order. And part of what the script does is it sets all the songs to the same level for me. And this is as a starting point. And it's not the same RMS level or LUFS level. It uses maximum short-term LUFS. So basically, the loudest part of each song is hitting at the same level, which is kind of what you want, right, for a record. Like, there's going to be songs that have quiet verses and build up, but as long as the loudest part of each song is about the same, that's a good starting point. And it does that. It does that for me in like 3 seconds or less. Among other things, it spaces them out so there's buffer, because I do the sequencing later in Wavelab. So it does a whole number of things when I run the setup script. But that's the big time saver, is it gets all the songs on the same page so that I'm feeding my analog chain at the ideal level, but all the songs are at the same level. You know, like I know some people that play the song out of their DAW at the native level of the song, no matter what. But honestly, like a lot of times that's perhaps too loud or not loud enough. And the cool thing with Reaper is it's doing it non-destructively. It's not making like a new file or a duplicate file. It's just internal gain on each song. You know,
it's clip gaining each track basically.
Yeah, Reaper has a thing called items, which are clips. And yeah, so it's adjusting the gain of each item. And then of course I fine tune it by ear, because if it's bass heavy, it's going to feel off once I correct the EQ and things like that. But it's a really great starting point. Gets me like moving along pretty quickly. And then I kind of pick a song to start with. It's not always the first song on the record. Sometimes the first song on a record is weird. It's like a weird intro. I try to find like a combination of the best mix versus the most normal song of the record. You know, somewhere in there's a balance of like, what's the best mix and not a totally weird song. And I start with that and dial it in. You know, I put plugins. The cool thing with most mastering programs is you can put plugins right on each clip or song or item, whatever you want to call it. So you're not opening up, you know, if you have a 12-song album, you don't have 12 tracks, because that gets really inefficient with plug-in resources and screen real estate, you know, because like you got these little tiny tracks with the stair step, and then you can't see anything. So
yeah, that's how you know I'm not a mastering engineer when
so all the songs go on the same track because they can have item effects. So I'll use the item effects before going analog to kind of like take care of any big problems, you know, surgical EQ, some de-essing, just for big broad strokes or anything like that. So I'll get the first song dialed in, and then of course I'll incorporate some analog gear. I have a insert switcher that lets me put the gear in any order. Like a lot of the things you see, like the Dangerous Liaison and some of these insert switchers, you kind of have to, they're all in a fixed order. Sometimes you can swap one or two pieces to be different order, but they're mostly in the same order, which is probably honestly fine for a lot of projects. But what's cool about the insert switcher I have is you can put the gear in any order. I can just press the buttons, whatever order I press the buttons, that's the order the gear is inserted. So you can do EQ first, then compressor, or flip them around. And so I've kind of picked the combination of gear I want to use. I, of course, don't use all the gear, but